What's up guys, I'm Phoenix Master 1 and welcome to my builds guide and unit analysis of Year Yarne. So he's a blue beast cavalier, so this time he's blue and he has got Very Rabbit Fang as his preferred weapon. His weapon's effect is always going to be active in the player phase, but in the enemy phase he needs to be solo, so he can get +6 attack and speed in the combat, and he can debuff opponents' attack and defense by 20% of his visible speed stat. He can also debuff foes' attack and defense by 20% of the visible speed stat of his. So his base speed is at 40 with a super boon, so that is definitely pretty nice for getting these kinds of debuffs on the enemy and just being a lot more bulky and for surviving in the player phase. He can also get -2 special cooldown after the combat if he's at or below 90% HP. So this is kind of similar to his playstyle of his original version. So he is going to be able to Galeforce pretty easily because he is going to be able to get like 3 cooldown in the combat versus a melee foe. And then after the combat, after he falls below that HP, he's going to be able to trigger Galeforce. So cavalry units usually do not have access to Special Spiral, and the usual Special Spiral doesn't even work with Galeforce, so having this in his weapon is definitely pretty good as a Galeforce unit. And then he has the standard Beast Cavalry transformation, which allows him to get +2 attack, and in the player phase he does have a mini impact effect which can let him get -4 attack and defense debuff on the foe in the combat, and he can also stop the follow-ups of the foes. So overall this weapon is decent because it does give him the offenses and does enable the Galeforce strategies, while also giving him the attack and defense debuff. So in case he wants to use the Heavy Blade Sacred Seal to get the special acceleration, it does make it a bit easy for him compared to the original version of his. And he does have base 43 attack, so that is definitely pretty nice for getting the Heavy Blade checks if you want to be running that. And his base kit is definitely pretty nice with Galeforce finally being available on a Grail unit. So for all of the players that are like me and are Galeforce connoisseurs and they haven't been able to summon Cordelia, I guess this is another way of getting Galeforce. And he also has speed defense solo 3 at 5-star and threat and attack and speed 2 at 4-star. So threat and skill I guess is going to be helpful in getting attack speed menace, but the speed defense solo slot skill is not really all that good, so mostly it's going to be used as a fodder for Galeforce and threat and attack and speed if he's going to be foddered at that. Overall as a unit we can definitely compare him to his original version and also to his mother, who is also a free-to-play Grail unit who can also function with her weapon refine. Pain can pretty much get that flow guard from her weapon refine, and Year Yarne does have the guaranteed follow-up attack in his weapon refine, which definitely helps him because, you know, beast units don't have access to the flow skills, though we do have beast agility now, which is actually pretty nice, but Year Yarne is definitely going to be missing out on the guaranteed follow-up attack. From this comparison we can see that overall he's a pretty decent free-to-play unit who can function with his good preferred weapon, giving him the in-combat attack debuff and defense debuff, which can definitely make his survival better because the impact effect that he gets out of the transformation can stack up with the attack and defense debuffs that he can get out of the primary effect. And when he's transformed, he's also going to be able to get that impact effect, so that's also really good. So you can function as a free-to-play Galeforce initiator in Aether Raids offense, and if you don't really have the premium units, which you kind of need to make it easy for you to Galeforce in Aether Raids offense, then he could be one of the units that can be helpful in starting out. But keep in mind that having no -1 special cooldown on his weapon is going to be kind of holding him back because he's not going to be able to have 4 cooldown Galeforce. Of course you can easily run him with Asker and achieve this, but still he doesn't really have this in his weapon present, and guard can definitely make it pretty annoying to Galeforce as he doesn't really get any kind of like tempo effect. And the offensive half of null follow-up is also something that is missing out of his weapon. So a lot of teams with tanky frontliners with follow-up negation effects, or with duo Asker teams that have got resonant shields up, they are going to be annoying for Yarne to double, and he's obviously going to be leaning a bit more towards Galeforce strategies with this kind of weapon. So if you don't really like that playstyle or don't really like to Galeforce that much, then he's of course not going to be a very incentivizing unit to build up for you. So as a Galeforce connoisseur, I would rate him as a pretty decent unit. He's not really too impactful because he is going to be missing out on many of the key things like -1 special cooldown, having the half version of null follow-up, and if you do run beast agility for the half null follow-up, then you're not going to be able to get the trace skill. So those are some of the key things that he's kind of missing, and that is really necessary in the climate of Aether Raids offense nowadays, to have those things, because guard effects are going to be pretty common, so getting past them is going to be a bit hard for him, and then he doesn't have -1 special cooldown. So triggering Galeforce is not the easiest with him despite his weapon compared to many of the units which make it a lot easier to do that. So he's not exactly the most top tier unit for Galeforce. But if you want to build him up for a budget and you just want to use him in Tempest Trial, then you can give him hit and run from a 3-star clear and that should be fine. His assist is definitely going to be pretty flexible, especially if you just want to use him for Tempest Trial. So he does need to initiate against a melee unit to get the full Galeforce off, because he's going to be able to get 3 cooldown out of doubling the opponent and taking their counter attack. And then with his weapon, he's going to be able to trigger Galeforce. So hit and run is basically a poor man's Kanto that we have easy access to. But if you want to run him with premium skills and actually want to invest into him more, then you can definitely run attack speed push 4, because the recall damage is definitely going to be helping you with the HP threshold of this weapon. And you can easily run speed defense near trace, which is, of course better than hit and run. So getting the in combat debuffs is definitely going to be pretty nice. And you can also get Pulse Smoke from the limited ephemera manuals that we did get with Groom Pent. So Pulse Smoke is going to be pretty good on him, because he can actually easily pulse down many of the opponents because of his survivability in the player phase with the impact effect and the attack debuffs that he can get. So you can run a solo Sacred Seal because it is going to be having synergy with the enemy phase condition of his weapon, and then you can also invest into him even if you don't really want to run him with Galeforce. Now Beast Agility is going to be making it a lot easier for him to transform and get that impact effect, but it also provides you with the half null follow-up. So the half null follow-up is actually active in both phases, and you're able to bypass the follow-up negation enemies pretty easily with Beast Agility in both phases. So unlike the flow skills, it actually works in both phases, so that's pretty nice for the Beast units. Of course, it's not like the most insane skill, but still it's really good for Yarne because he is missing out on that half null follow-up with his weapon. And you can also run Speed Smoke 4 on him so that he can get the damage reduction, and that is definitely going to be making him tanky with the attack debuffs that he can get. Now keep in mind that his visible speed stat is going to be affecting the debuffs that he can do to the enemy, so I do think that plus speed IV is pretty much going to be his best IV with a build like this. But if you want to use Heavy Blade with him, then plus attack is going to be a bit better, but you're definitely going to be trading off doubling some of the faster threats if you do run plus attack for getting the Heavy Blade checks. And if you do plus and merge him, then you can also use him in Arena with Beast and Trace, which is available on Newer Elm. So this does allow you to have the Trace effect, but it doesn't really give you any kind of in-combat debuff. And this does allow you to transform a lot easily because it does remove the transformation condition. So this is going to be helpful in Arena, especially if you don't really have invested into a lot of Beast units and Dragons already. So I can definitely see this being used in Arena. But unfortunately, this doesn't really score 300 SP, so he's not really going to be able to score like a 185 BSC unit with a build like this. But still, a Trace skill is going to be the best thing that you can have on a Cavalier in Arena to take advantage of. And you can also run Galeforce so that you can trigger that against a lot of the enemies, especially against the melee foes. And you can also run one-tap Galeforce on him if you want to use him in Aether Raids offense. So Fury could be run in a slot A because not only does it help him get into his weapon's range, but it can also activate the Wings of Mercy of his allies, and it can also help you get more attack and defense debuff on the enemy, because keep in mind that it is tied to the visible speed stat, and Fury does increase that. And if you're going to be running Heavy Blade, then attack defense unit trace is definitely going to be pretty nice with a plus attack IV. So with this build, you can just Galeforce in a single tap, because you're going to be able to get -1 special cooldown out of Asker. And assuming you attack an opponent that does not have a guard skill, then you're going to be able to get 2 cooldown out of Heavy Blade, and then after the combat you're going to be able to get -2 special cooldown to activate his Galeforce. So this is definitely a build that you can run, and Aether Raids is definitely going to be the game mode where he's going to be used a lot. Now because he doesn't have the null follow-up effect, it is going to be pretty annoying for him, but that could be fixed in the Astro season with Naga, who can give the guaranteed follow-up attack, which can basically function like a half null follow-up effectively for Yarne, who's pretty fast. So I don't really see a big reason to use him as an initiator over Thor in the Astro season unless you run him with a specific build that can make him Hex Trap proof. So Hex Traps are right now only targeting 65 HP enemies, so by stacking up the HP skills, you're basically going to be able to be Hex Trap proof and easily initiate against some of the teams. Now when you're running a Galeforce team, I think it's pretty important to have some variants available depending on the situation and depending on the enemy's team. So if you run into a team where Hex Trap is present there in a key location, then you can definitely use them to initiate against the enemy and easily pulse down many of the pre-charged specials of the enemies as well. And speed defense unit trace is definitely going to be helpful so that you can have some mobility. Usually counter control is going to be present there in the Dark season and not so much in the Anima season. But still, many of the higher echelon teams are definitely going to be having counter control, so you have to watch out for that. And if you do use him in the light season, then I would definitely highly suggest you to run him with Na, because she can provide him the special cooldown support. So that does make it pretty easy for him to, you know, Galeforce against someone like Medius, for example, who he's not really going to be able to double because he doesn't really have access to the guaranteed follow-up attack without Naga, and he does not have partial follow-up in his weapon. So by having Na give him the special acceleration status, he's going to be able to Galeforce a lot easily, and this is something that is not affected by the feud status, and you also do not need to maintain the proximity unlike Warbreaker of Thor or Brave Lucina or anything like that. So Na is going to be a pretty amazing support unit that many people are going to be getting from the Hall of Forms, and you can definitely eliminate one of his weaknesses by running Beast Agility and trading the Neotrace skill for this skill, because you're going to be able to get the partial follow-up to double many of the units. So this is going to be a bit more high investment build. And by running the plus attack IV with the Ascended Floret, you're definitely going to be able to hit a lot harder. And Fury is of course going to be the main way of getting into the Wings of Mercy range of your allies in 3 combats, and for also activating his weapon pretty easily. Not to mention the visible stats do increase his speed, so that is going to be giving you more attack and defense debuff on the opponent. Make sure to share this video with your friends if they're trying to build up New Yarn, and if you enjoyed, make sure to leave a like and a comment, helps me tremendously. And if you really enjoyed, I would really appreciate if you could leave a like and a comment. And if you really want to support me further, then you can also go ahead and use super thanks down below or become a YouTube member. And for more FEH videos in the next year, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell, because I wish YouTube sub boxes were about as effective as Yarne is against the cavalry units. So with that said, I'll see you guys next time. Thank you so much for watching and have a great day.